Hi everybody, it's Mr. Garrett, and we're going to go through a couple example problems here about some of the last things in Chapter 4 that we're going to explain. Mainly everything in Chapter 4 is dealing with quadratic equations. The most important thing is how do we solve these quadratic equations. There's 4 different things that we can do. 1, we can factor. 2, we can use the square root formula, which we just talked about. 3 is a quadratic formula, which works for everything. The only thing is it can be a little long and tedious, and so we try and avoid that if all possible. And then the 4th is completing the square, which we really won't work on or talk too much about this year. We will next year in pre-calc. So the solving quadratic equations, like I said, the first thing that we can do is factor. And so if we look at this problem right here, which is 2x squared plus 5x minus 3 equals 0. We have it set equal to 0. I'm going to see, can I factor this? So I'm going to set up my 2 sets of parentheses, set equal to 0. I'm going to go 2x and x, because those have to multiply together to give me 2x squared. And then I got to figure out negative 3. So that's 1 and 3. So I can put a 3 here and a 1 here. And is there a way that I could use 3 and 1, or 3 times 2 and 1 times x to get me 5? And actually that does work out. I can put a 3 here, make it a plus 3, put a minus 1 there. I'm going to go back up here and erase this. Alright, and when I do that, I see that this is 6x, this is negative 1x, and 6x and negative 1x is 5x. So that factors. Once I have those factors, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set it equal to 0, set each one equal to 0. And then I'm going to solve. So I add 1, I get 2x equals 1, divide by 2, and x equals 1/2. Over here, I subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 3. So my solution for this problem is x equals 1/2 or negative 3. So there's my 2 solutions. Now, I could do the same thing over here with this one on the right if I wanted to, but since there's no x term, alright, I can use the square root formula. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to get this x squared by itself. In order to do that, I subtract 4 from both sides. Subtract 4, and I get 5x squared equals 10. Still got to get that x squared by itself, so again I divide by 5, and I get x squared equals 2. To undo the square, I simply square root, and I get x equals the square root of 2. Now when we're solving using the quadratic, or not the quadratic formula, but the square root, I have to put a plus or the minus in front here. And that's just because the positive or the negative value squared will give us the correct answer. And so right there, x equals plus or minus square root of 2. Now, the third method that we're going to use is the quadratic formula. So when we can't use the factoring method and we can't use the square root method, we need to use the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula works really well when there's an x term, like here. Alright, we got 4x, so we can't use the square root method. And I can't factor this. I don't know 2 numbers that multiply together to give me negative 3 and add together to give me 4. So I can't factor, I can't square root, time to use the quadratic formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my a, b, and c values. So a is equal to 1, because that's the number in front of the x squared term. B is equal to 4, and c is equal to negative 3. So when I look at this and I identify those values, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug them in over here to this quadratic formula. So if I see this, I'm going to, let me get it to my pen here, x equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3 all over 2 times 1. Biggest and most important thing is to make sure that it's all over, alright, 2 times 1 or 2 times a, and to make sure that we simplify the square root properly. If If we don't do either one of those, we're going to end up into some trouble. So now we got negative 4 plus or minus square root. 4 squared is 16. 4 times 1 times negative 3 is negative 12. So since it's minus negative 12, it's actually going to be plus 12 all over 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Now, negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 16 plus 12 is 28 all over 2. And then simplify. Negative 4 plus or minus. Perfect squares that go into 28 would be 4 and 7. So we're going to say 2 radical 7 all over 2. Now I'm almost finished. I've simplified the radical properly, but I got to simplify this fraction. So I need to go ahead and break this up and say negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2, plus or minus 2 radical 7 over 2, which is radical 7. Those are my two solutions to this quadratic formula. And you can tell why it would have been difficult to come up with those, because this is an irrational number. It goes on forever. And so now, with the quadratic formula, I've gone through and simplified or solved a very difficult problem. Let's do one more example. This one is 3x squared equals 12x minus 1. The first step that we need to do is set this so it's equal to 0. So we're going to say 3x squared minus 12x plus 1 equals 0. And I'm also going to identify a, which is 3, b, which is negative 12, oops, and c, which is 1. Plug it into our quadratic formula, which is negative b, so negative 12 plus or minus square root of negative 12 squared minus 4 times 3 times 1 all over 2 times 3. Alright, set it all up properly. Negative 12 is 12 plus or minus. Square root of negative 12 is 144. If you get negative 144, you got to put the negative 12 in parentheses. Minus 4 times 3 times 1, which is 12, all over 6. Come down here, we got 12 plus or minus the square root of 132, all over 6. Square root of 132, that's going to be, the only perfect square that goes into that is 4, and it's 4 times 33. So that's going to give me 12 plus or minus 2 radical 33 all over 6. Let's simplify. 12 over 6 is 2 plus or minus square root of 33 over 3. And that is our solutions. So what have we done? We've found a way to solve quadratic equations by using the quadratic formula, which will work for everything. But as you can see, this takes a lot of work. And so we're really going to want to make sure that we only use it if we can't factor and we can't use the square root method. Otherwise, we want to use those methods because they're a little bit quicker and easier. So enjoy. I hope you enjoyed. And make sure that you fill out the survey on the link on Progress Book, and we'll see you tomorrow.